Hi, my name is Etana. I'm here at DailyClout, and I'm with Daniel Horowitz. Daniel is the senior editor at TheBlaze, as well as the host of Conservative Review, and he recently co-authored a book with Steve Deese, if I'm correct, called The Fourth Reich. So, Daniel, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you. And yes, welcome to that Fourth Reich, or as Klaus Schwab calls it, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But either way, it's the same outcome for all of us.
All right, let's get into it. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you to write the book, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Obviously, I never dreamed of focusing on therapeutics and vaccines and gene therapies and understanding the way viruses work and cytokine storms and how to treat it. I was a typical political journalist, conservative reporter in conservative media in the United States. And we focused on the typical issues you would, foreign policy, immigration, taxes, spending, budgets. I never dreamed of getting into this. But that's kind of the point. The divide in this country, and it's not the country, it's really the world, is no longer traditional right and left. It's really this up versus down. You have Western democracies that are no longer democracies, where, and this is what we describe as the Fourth Reich, it's global, it's public-private partnership, it's built on very scary technology to basically implement a transhumanist agenda where they fully control our bodies, minds, souls, and all of their policies are driving that. And COVID was the Super Bowl of this. COVID was what catalyzed, in Klaus Schwab's own words, the Great Reset, to enable them to acculturate an entire global civilization to living with the biomedical surveillance state and then extending it beyond biomedical. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, this is not politics as usual. I need to start boning up on this. And in 2020, we focused on masking and lockdowns and then the vaccines and all of this, because no one else was doing this in mainstream, even conservative media, even though this was the most important issue. And headed forward, this is the greatest threat, the biomedical security state, which really builds off of the Third Reich. And we could talk about that. So we warn people that we cannot just go back to politics as usual, as if the last 2.5 years never occurred, because a lot of it still is going on. Some of the masking and the mandates in healthcare setting is still going on. The ability to bring it out anytime is still going on. The creation of dangerous experimentations is still going on, and in fact is now turbocharged. The more it comes out that it's harmful and ineffective, the more they fast track at the speed of science. More COVID therapeutics, but also now they're working on RSV, the flu, and 15 other mRNAs for Moderna. And we're like, we need a new Nuremberg trial, a new Nuremberg code, a reaffirmation of those principles so that this never happens again.
Well, first of all, that was an amazing intro to your book, and I'm really excited to read it. I have it out on order for when it gets published and delivered. But you're 100% right about how the divide is no longer right and left. It's freedom versus control. And it really just feels like we're living in two completely different silos of information, of reality, of approach to the world, the way we view things. Where do you see this split? Where do you see this dam breaking to bring one world into the other somehow?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, you need to have an inflection point. And my concern is that inflection point is ebbing if we don't seize the moment. This is a very unique window. On the one hand, the major policies have been alleviated and the public is onto it. A lot of this stuff, and it was very popular in 2020, the restrictions, and people were afraid, they're done with it. But on the other hand, if you let it go on a little bit too long, there won't be an impetus for policy change. And that's why I think we need to seize the moment while it's still fresh in the minds of people. It's unpopular. This is really the driving point of the end of the book, where I have a list of policy solutions The thing about America is that we have this blessing from Madison's design, that it's not a winner take all, that it's all built on the federal government. We have 50 state governments, and most of the problems, some of it is federal in nature, the liability issues, the gain of function, the biomedical security state at DOD and the CIA. But in terms of the interaction with the people and the medical system and expectations of following the Nuremberg Code, a patient bill of rights, allowing doctors to prescribe, allowing doctors to speak out, ensuring a right to bodily autonomy, making health status part of anti-discrimination law, that you can't discriminate in the realm of public accommodation based on. This could all be done at a state level. And state legislatures, most of them convene after the new year. They convene only a few months a year. And that is the window we have to capture this lightning in the bottle. Wait a minute. They just committed a democide. I mean, this is straight up. I mean, we could talk for hours, relitigating 3 years worth of data. But the most important thing that we need to remember is CDC's own VAERS and VSafe, their own pharmacovigilance, indicates a 7.7% rate of clinical level injury, meaning that at a minimum you had to see a doctor, and you extrapolate that to VAERS reporting, and you'll find an underreporting factor of 26. You take those ailments and maladies in VAERS, this is their own system, and you multiply that by 26 based on the VSafe data, which is also their system. And you get, in the United States, roughly 400,000 vaccine deaths and roughly several million debilitating injuries, and maybe 9, 10, 12 million or so, it's hard to put an exact figure, that had a clinical level injury at some point. That is utterly insane. We have the negative efficacy. I just have an article out on that. We have the hospital treatments, the denial of organ transplants for not getting the experimental shots that should have been banned, the denial of treatment to a rape victim who wouldn't put on a mask. These are things we can't walk away from. The way people were treated in the hospitals, the blocking of treatment, the pushing of things like sedatives and opioids for people who didn't need them, but they slow breathing of people in respiratory distress. You can't just walk away from that as if it never happened. We need to understand where this is coming from, the irremediably broken ties between big government and big pharma, and the mindset it has imbued in your run-of-the-mill doctor, how they're not free thinking anymore. This is the biggest pro-life issue of our time. So that's the point, that we need to take stock of what exactly happened. It would be bad enough if they quietly just kind of scrub this and like, all right, okay, no, but quietly scrub the shots and took them off the market. We would need to really make an inquiry into this. But they're doubling down. I mean, they're still to this day pushing baby shots of variants that no longer exist, that have been proven to be negative efficacy. We just have the Cleveland Clinic study that shows after 90 days, the more you inject, the more you infect. This was 50,000 of their own staff in the study. And, 3 doses were worse than 2 and 2 worse than 0. You can't walk away from this. And then Etana, look, next year, they plan on fast tracking, if nothing changes, an RSV mRNA shot, which anyone, and I didn't know immunology before this wasn't my issue, but how do you come away from the last 3 years not understanding the concepts of pathogenic priming, original antigenic sin, antibody-dependent disease enhancement, that respiratory viral vaccines, particularly RSV, are not good candidates for vaccination? They haven't been able to crack that code for 60 years. They wound up being negatively effective. What, suddenly they cracked the code? No, suddenly they found a framework through which they can get things approved at the speed of science. Oh, it injures people? Great, let's keep this going. So what I track in the book is that this wasn't, oops, I burnt the toast, we made a mistake. we show clearly how they knew from day one this didn't work, this had side effects, and they didn't care. They knew the lockdowns didn't work, it was all pain and no gain, and they didn't care. They could have stopped it at any day, and they let it go on and on and on. I will tell you, in most states, and certainly most countries, we still don't have a framework in place to stop it from happening again.
Okay, that's all, again, a lot to take in. When I speak to people, I find that you get a couple of responses. People who are outside of our, media bubble, like you say, how do people not know about original antigenic sin? But most people, of course not.
Pediatricians don't.
Are just, they're just opening their Facebook feeds and seeing the articles that are shown to them, and that's not on this topic. So some people, when if you talk to them about the vaccines, if you're asking about it and they are not personally suffering, their response will be, what's the big deal? It's over. Nobody's mandating it. You're fine. Nothing happened. And then you have the people who are like, vaccines saved 3 million people or whatever it is that they're claiming now. And just don't want to hear any response outside of a medical study that was, peer reviewed in their specific journals with the authors that they approve of. How do we deal with that divide?
Well, this is actually very easy, because you could theoretically have a therapeutic that works against the ailments itself, but causes a lot of side effects. The thing about this is, prima facie, the fact that we're still talking about it right now means it didn't work. And, so I think that has gotten out there. Now, you're going to have the 20, 30% in a divided world the way we are, with the amount of media control they have, that they're always going to get. But I think we have turned a corner on that. The injuries have become ubiquitous enough. And look, I mean, you see where you are in Israel, the take up on with every successive shot has really gone down to a trickle. So I think the memo really has gotten out there. The key now is to understand that it's not over. That I think is the bigger concern now, the apathy, more so than even siding with it. Now people are like, oh, I'm back to normal.
Exactly.
And they're benefiting because they are not retreating. They're reloading. Okay, they're on to the next thing. And that power that they have accumulated, the expectation from society that it's okay to constantly surveil you, it's okay to make these mandates, they're still there. And by the way, they are still there in the medical field. They're still there largely in the military. They officially in the U.S. military got rid of it in 30 days from now based on the passage of this defense authorization bill. It's very limited. They could bring it up again for a future order, could be brought up, because the amendment to block that got defeated. This is not over with. Mainly what has come out is not that what they did was illogical, immoral, illegal, and inhumane. It's like, hey, the numbers don't currently justify it. Well, that means they could bring it out at any time. They're already in Philadelphia. They're bringing back the barbaric, just bloodletting, almost like it's like a bloodletting ritual of masking children, where we now have peer-reviewed studies that not only doesn't it work, but it increases your CO2 levels. It's funny, these same people don't like CO2 very much, but they don't mind it on your breathing holes, and that is barbaric. And the fact that they could still do that is a problem. And one of the biggest things we're calling for is a constitutional amendment in every state. Federal level in the United States, very hard to get a constitutional amendment change. State level, you can do it a lot of places, to make it very clear that there's a right to bodily autonomy, that no person could ever be forced to place a therapeutic on or in their body, a medical device, therapeutic treatment, and be discriminated against in the realm of public accommodation on account of exercising that right. And that is both the moral, legal, and scientific thing to do. Because what we've learned from the last couple of years, and what everyone should come away with, is that there is never a moral, legal, or scientific rationale to say person A needs to take an affirmative action against their body to protect person B. There's no such science. Meaning, If it works, you have the prerogative to do it. If it doesn't, well, it doesn't work, right? That's the beauty of it. There's no such thing as your vaccine protects me. It's, hey, you know, if you get it, you get it. If you ever come up with a safe and effective vaccine, hey, it's your problem not getting it. There is never a rationale, and that needs to be uprooted, plowed over with salt on it. That could never be done again. And that's the principle that we need to reaffirm to the Nuremberg Code.
Well, I love that you laid out real policy, possible policy changes to actually have some sort of roadmap for the future. That's really cool. I am optimistic. I'm optimistic, first of all, because of the amount of communication that we as individuals have, which we've never had before in any sort of global crisis. We've never had this ability to just instantly share massive amounts of information with people all over the world. And honestly, it's something that like is
the
very
best
exciting.
Movement ever. This is the best movement. You know, I will tell you, this is the best thing to come out of COVID. I have made such great friendships. We've been able to work together. You know, I was very siloed. I was kind of a right winger, and I only worked with people like that. And the beauty of this is that, you know, you'll have people like Naomi Wolf and myself on the same page. And I actually feel closer with someone like her than a lot of people I traditionally worked with who maybe they were conservative, but that's kind of an outdated term, but they don't fully understand the issues that matter right now, what we're up against. And that, I think, that new medical freedom movement is a really good thing to have come out of this, because it turns out this is not just a COVID problem. That, you know, when it comes to cancer and a lot of other things, I'm not saying there's a definitive cure, but what I am saying is there's a racket of pharma working with government that it's not about the science and well-being of the people. It's about perpetuating a scam, and you can have off-label cheap drugs that don't cause side effects. Hey, maybe you ought to try them. Maybe you ought to put some money into that, minimal money. No. Now I used to think, oh, well, if there's something that could help with cancer, we would have turned over the stone by now. Now I'm like, oh, now I understand. So this is a scab we needed to pick at, and we need a lot of reforms. I know in Florida, they're looking at a ton of these ideas to empower doctors to speak out, make sure they can't be discriminated against, lose their license, make sure they're able to prescribe. That's the point. We need to come away from this with discernible policy changes.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, the point you made about you and Naomi Wolf both being on the same page, you know, for example, with someone like Steve Bannon, is just demonstrates how the entire right-left paradigm shifted to, again, control versus freedom. And the medical freedom movement is just, like you said, it's been a journey that you just meet quality people with integrity who, without this disaster, we never would have been kind of brought together and introduced to each other. And it's really inspiring to see people as individuals and then, you know, form cohesive groups and really work hard to push back against this globalist deep state agenda that has way too much power, influence, and control. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at health overall. Anybody who's kind of had their eyes opened by specifically the COVID response and the COVID vaccine is looking at health and the medical system and the factory that produces doctors and medications all in one force, you know, in one flow. People are just looking at it differently and kind of trying to see, like, how can I naturally take control of my own health and find my own information, and I think that's a good thing. I think that I
call that our own gain of function research.
That's great. I like that. We could take the term away, like we took deplorables, right? I just think a lot of movement will be made towards creating some sort of alternate medical economy,
parallel universe. That is that gain of function that we need. Meeting people like a Ryan Cole, like a Peter McCullough. I mean, someone like a Dr. Ryan Cole, he has changed my life.
Yeah.
Because what he did was he made complicated concepts accessible to laymen. And now we're able to call these people out. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because it looks very intimidating. Legitimately, 95%, I'm making up a number, but it's almost all of doctors will go along with something. Well, how could they all be wrong? Well, now we understand it's not 95%, it's one. It's put in a trough, and like a bunch of camels, they come, and whatever slop is thrown in that, they'll just come and, I mean, you could put hemlock in a shot, and if it comes from the cool kids, they'll just lop it up. There's no circumspection, nothing, and it's very scary. We now learn. And again, you can have a doctor that's very competent at surgery or a certain thing, but you step outside that box, we call it Medscape medicine. It's the Medscape journal, whatever's drive-by stuff is put out in there, that's what comes into their boxes, their emails. And what we've learned is, see, I would, let me give you an in-the-weeds example. I never heard of methylprednisolone and dexamethasone, much less be able to pronounce them. Those are two types of steroids, okay? So they made standard of care dexamethasone, and all of the Patriot doctors were very certain that for pulmonary inflammation, methylprednisolone was much better. So I don't know. I'm a conservative journalist. I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't know what that is. I don't care. But one side was very passionate about it, and they explained the science. The other side was shut up, wear a mask, get shut. Okay, but what do you have to say to that? And it was very easy for me because only one side was actually looking at the mechanisms of action, understanding the biochemistry, breaking this down for you, whereas the other side was just drinking out of the same trough. So I think what we've learned from that is we need to find a way to empower this, because what medicine has become is that most countries have a socialized medical system. America is notorious for officially not having one, but they basically do, because it's just funneled through one extra private layer, but it's a monopoly propped up by government of systems. So nowadays, most doctors in America don't work independently. They work for systems. So the edict goes down that this is standard of care. They don't think anymore. They follow protocols. If the protocol is good, you're in luck. If it's not, you're screwed, and they'll never change that. And that's what needs to change. And we need to start slaying sacred cows. You can't have certain things off limits. You're a racist. It can't be done. No. I'm pro-vax. That's like saying I'm pro-antibiotics. I'm pro-surgery. Well, it's a technique. I mean, it works for some. Depends on the ailment. Depends on the type, depends on the situation. And you have to look at everything. And, you know, I'm a very strong, opinionated person. I have a lot of preconceived views.
Yeah.
Vaccines, I didn't think twice about it. I never thought about it.
100%.
You know, everything I've learned now, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. It makes sense to pursue vaccines for certain things, but the notion that you're going to come up with a safe and effective vaccine, especially for respiratory viruses, not so simple. And there's a lot of landmines you have to navigate. And now we need to, start listening to some of those voices. I used to think like I knew about Bobby Kennedy's group. I was like, I don't know anyone who was injured. And now I'm like, oh, that's why I don't know anyone, because it's censored. Now and I'm not saying the other shots, I don't think anything quite rises to the level of this, which is quite special. I mean, over 14,000 categories of maladies in bears affecting every organ system, every part of the body you could imagine. I mean, this thing is truly unbelievable. I agree with those commentators that said this was a medical miracle. It really is. I mean, it's amazing how they could have designed something like this. But, the notion that some of these others might have been causing autoimmune. For example, as a layman, I thought antibodies were awesome. But antibodies are a complicated thing. God made the right type in the right amount in the right place. Could you mimic that? Maybe. But it's a needle you got to thread. And you don't do it properly, you get pathogenic priming. You get autoantibodies. Is this why we have a torrent of allergies and autoimmune? It's something that needs to be looked at. And one of the things we call for is every state needs to put together a vaccine commission. And you start from scratch. What are the genres out on the market? What are the different types? Some are better than others. Some have more aluminum than others. We need to understand the cost-benefit analysis of everyone and stop treating vaccines like being opposed to slavery or like that's like, No,
it's an assumed, like
start from the beginning. And we need independent audits. What we've learned is that you have regulatory capture. And I think this is important for your audience to understand. What we have in America, and it's really everywhere, is the worst of all. See, you could have independent government control, very strong regulation. Okay, that's one level. Or you could have a total free market. What we have is the worst of all. It's regulatory capture. So it's not a free market. You can't do what you want. There's a regulatory process you have to go through, but it's captured by a small subset of people. So hence you're like, man, they'll take a poisonous, dangerous product and okay, but then we can get our products. No, when it comes to that, they'll take something that's already FDA approved and essentially ban it, but then something that's prima facie problematic, they'll get through. And that's what we need to rectify. And again, what I'm calling for is, particularly in red states where you have Republican trifecta supermajority controls, I want to know what you're going to do. You control healthcare at a local level. Most of this stuff you control. For example, a lot of states have institutions that are engaging in gain-of-function research. What's to stop a state from banning gain-of-function, having criminal penalties ascribed to those doing it, and give a civil cause of action in court to anyone who feels they're damaged by it to sue those individuals? That's one idea. Another idea is to say, look, we can't trust the FDA anymore, and we're going to come with our own backstop to vet any new vaccine that comes out. We know there's this new framework that they're not following the science anymore. They're not following protocols for clinical trials. And we need that extra layer. And in this state, we're going to have our own committee to go through these questions and make our own recommendations. And to a large extent, the Florida governor has gone in that direction, has created this path to kind of shadow box the CDC and the system. So a lot of our book at the end is focused on what these states can do. I don't want to hear, oh, well, it's the FDA. There's a lot you can do. And I think Florida is really leading on that and showing that, and I'll give you a great example, what a state can do. Publix is one of the biggest employers in the state of Florida. Big grocery chain, but they're also a pharmacy, and they're largely responsible for the original campaign to distribute and administer the shots. When Florida came out and said, we're going to recommend against the shots for children, Publix went with Florida, not with CDC, and said, yeah, we're not going to distribute that. And that's the model for the future.
It's kind of still using government to not manipulate, but control a little bit through the private sector.
Yes.
But to allow more freedoms and more caution. I think, like what you were saying about taking a sledgehammer to sacred cows, I think, that definitely one of the unintended consequences of this vaccine debacle has been that traditional vaccine uptake has also dramatically increased, in comparison to what it used to be, which is, like you said, like I always thought, all my friends always thought, you don't think about it. You don't think twice. You take your kid, you get them all their
all the doctors are saying this is good. It must be good. They can't all be wrong, right?
Exactly. And now somebody said to me once, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Colgate. I want to speak to the 5th. He's the one whose opinion that I is the one that's interesting.
Etana, let me give you this example. It's so obvious that we often forget it and stop talking about it. Let's put the shots on a shelf for a minute, because they get all, that became all political. Let's talk about remdesivir. 2.5 years later, there's almost no doctor who will look you in the eye and say it's safe and effective at this point. And you speak to anyone, I think that's pretty universal. But nonetheless, it's still standard of care, and they will still administer in the hospital. It still hasn't been taken off and rescinded its EUA status.
Atrocious.
How does that happen? So that's an example of how you could have something that everyone could kind of know as a private joke. This thing is crap, but it still remains the standard of care. That is a very scary thought, how they could just ignore that. Paxlovid, they have more rebounds than Dennis Rodman in his heyday at the Chicago Bulls. And it causes this rebound effect. Anyone want to look into that? That's standard of care. The CDC just allocated another $2 billion for something like that without asking questions. States need to say, look, for us to distribute and endorse them, we need independent studies. Since when could the fox guard the hen house? Hey, Pfizer says, Merck says 90% effective. Well, I want an independent audit. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to design a trial that's going to come out with anything but that result. And this is what we've learned. And again, I'm not giving specific medical advice here, but you look at cancer. And one of the things that I've learned from this whole saga, being around a lot of these great, independent, bold doctors, is that when you understand inflammation and the immune system, it all kind of comes together. And a big part of cancer is rooted in inflammation and the immune system. And what we've learned from a lot of the drugs that they were experimenting with for COVID, that when I say experimenting, it was, the safety was already established ages ago. It was whether it worked, which is fine. There's no downside. We now understand that, not everything pharma did over 50 years is bad. Over the years, they have developed good drugs, some better than others. And over time, they've developed things that are broad spectrum anti-inflammatories, broad spectrum immunomodulators. And what it turns out is there is some promise, and there are a number of academic papers and even some studies that need to be furthered for some of these things, these broad, and again, I don't want to get too specific, but antiparasitics, antifungals in particular, that are anti-inflammatory that seem to have some promise for cancer. In my past life, I would have thought, well, that's easy to verify. You would have turned over that stone. I mean, people are suffering and dying and on terrible chemotherapy that ravages their body. You would have looked at that, right? No, that is going to be stifled. And the only ones who have enough money to put together large randomized controlled trials are the ones guarding the henhouse. That needs to be reformed. So one of the things I'm calling for in the book, and watch out, we might start to see someone taking up this call. One of the ideas that we propose is taking a percentage of the billions of dollars we spend on cancer research, and just a portion of it, and having a grant program for the following. To apply for research, here are the candidates. It's something that is already FDA approved and off patent. So you take the politics out of it, you take the game out of it, you take the money out of it, you're not going to make a ton of money off of it. And that has some sort of nascent research, in vitro, animal, human observational, that hasn't been taken to the next level. Here's the money. Conduct a large randomized controlled trial. See the dosage. See if this stuff works for breast cancer, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer. And I suspect, if you have a list, and it does exist, of 20 or so anti-inflammatories, I bet you'll find something out of it. And it keeps me up at night that we're sitting on this and we know it will never be taken to the next level because of politics.
Well, hopefully our upcoming parallel health and medical economy will tackle some of these issues. But you've done an amazing job laying out your case and what you're calling for and a roadmap ahead. And I think we're out of time, but I really appreciate you being with us. Can you please tell our audience where they can find you, when they can expect the book to be published, and where they can buy it?
Sure. The book should come out in about 6 to 7 weeks. It will be, obviously on Amazon, but you can go to trialsandexecution.com. Yes, that's what we're calling for. Go big or go home. Trialsandexecution.com is where you can order it, but also download our opening argument. It's a mock Nuremberg trial, and the opening statement that kind of encapsulates what has occurred the last 3 years. You could already download it for free online, so make sure you get that. I'm at RM Conservative on Twitter, and you can follow my columns at TheBlaze.com or ConservativeReview.com. And then if you like my rantings, every day I do it. The Conservative Review podcast on iTunes or anywhere you choose to listen to podcasts.
Amazing. Welcome back to Twitter. As a side note, Daniel was kicked off for half a year. So welcome back to the party. It's super fun over there now. And thank you for being with us. Happy Hanukkah.
You too.
Thank you.
And we'll speak to you on the other side of the new year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf of DailyClout, and I am asking you to please, if you like the video you just saw, support us, become a member, donate. You can send checks to P.O. Box 24, Millerton, New York, 12546, or go to DailyClout, DailyClout, become a member or donate. Thank you so much for your support. Every penny goes for paying our hardworking staff, paying hosting costs, and paying our lawyers who have been leading the fight to keep you safe and free, to keep the Constitution safe and to keep you free. Thank you so much.